Okay. So I think we will get started. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for coming out to join us today. We appreciate it. So I like to do a little housekeeping right at the beginning. Restrooms, if you go out of this room and go straight down the hall, they're going to be just down the hall. There's also a drinking fountain down that hall. So we do an emergency exit here as well as the front doors. You can exit on their emergency exit as well. So just some quick housekeeping. And then I also want to mention, so we record all of our programs, and some of them are on a members only page. So if you are a member, that is a great benefit for you. If you are not a member, that is something good to know if you are interested in becoming a member, that we do have some of those programs for members. And then I think I will get our program started. So Randy Samuelson Brown is the author of The Beaten Territory and The Bad Old Days of Colorado, Untold Stories of the Wild West, which is a finalist of the Colorado Book Awards 2021 in history. She's originally from Golden and has always been passionately interested in Colorado history. A C-SPAN author, she now lives in Denver. And one of the best parts about publishing books for her is sharing Colorado's little-known history and speaking at museums, libraries, and book clubs. She also has a new series coming out January 1st named Dark Range, and it's a contemporary Western series. So I will pass it over to Randy.
Thanks. So, here, I'll stand up. So this young man here gave me an idea how to start the whole program about Golden, right? And it's about living in a small town, which Golden used to be a lot smaller, as maybe you know or maybe you don't. But I used to work as a volunteer, I think this was even before I could drive, at the Astor House Museum, okay? And one day another girl and I were working in there, and we heard like this moaning, and it's like ghosts. And we're like, oh no, this can't possibly be. So then we started singing like church hymns, because we were like freaked out, you know. Kept on going, like chains rattling. I go flying out of the Astor House and go talk to the mayor who worked in the butcher shop, which is, it's like the Territorial Capitol building. I don't know what restaurant's in there now. But so I go up and I'm like, there's ghosts in the Astor House, there's ghosts in the Astor House. And he's like, oh, I don't know, you know. And I go back, you know, because like I had to go back, right, because it's a museum and I left it wide open and all this sort of stuff. And like this policeman comes strolling up and then to me like, no urgency, whatever. And he comes up and he kind of looks around and he goes in the back and he finds these two boys, like back where like the kitchen used to be, like with the pumped water, scaring the bejesus out of us. So that's not even the bad part. So then my mom comes to get me and we're driving right home and she's, you're kind of quiet, what's wrong? Nothing, you know. Then we're sitting at dinner and she's still looking at me. She's like, are you sure nothing's wrong? And I knew that damn Golden transcript was going to come out the next day with Avenue flashes in it. So I had to say something because I was pretty sure this was going to make it in. I'm like, well, I told the mayor that there's ghosts in the Astor House. And she's like, you did what? And so I explained the whole thing, and I'm so glad I did because the next morning, the transcript, or next afternoon, the transcript came out, Avenue flashes. Randy Samuelson was working at the Astor House and had otherworldly visitors. so you really can't get away with a lot. And Golden used to be smaller, and so like this could happen. I don't know that it would happen now like that, but it was like I was appalled, and I'd forgotten all about that till I talked to you. So it's like, oh my goodness.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. He can tell you stories about Lahonda. Yeah. So when I was researching this program tonight, I don't even remember how the whole topic came up, like did I want to do a talk on Golden? And growing up, I thought Golden was the most staid place ever. I mean, you couldn't really get in that much trouble because people knew you, they tell your parents, you know, there wasn't that much stuff going on, you know. So, but digging back into the older information, I found out that I was wrong. So now I'm kind of looking at Golden through different eyes. There you go. So here's a picture of Golden about 1880. This picture is courtesy of the Denver Public Library. Most of the pictures are, I think I've got one or two out of this library, or library museum. So inhabitants. There's really two very good books on golden history. Wagenbach and Thistlewood. One of the Mrs. Wagenbach or whatever has got a book out there about being a woman in golden. But according to these two people, Arapaho and other Plains tribes used to frequent this area, so we all kind of knew that. In fact, the first settlement before Golden was called Arapaho City, so it's probably out towards the Coors Brewery. According to those authors, Arapaho, the tribe, used to leave their deceased on the ground or in scaffolding on the mesas surrounded by their weapons. So these two ladies go on to say about how there was like arrowheads scattered all over the top of the mesas. I mean, I spent so many afternoons up there looking for that stuff. I never found anything, but you know, it's a good story. It could be true. The Utes apparently did not frequently come into this valley because there was a battle between them and the Arapaho. And I know this, it happened up in Fairplay, and so you can find still arrowheads, encampment stuff, because there was basically a huge range war between these two tribes. But really that was up in Fairplay, so I don't really know what Golden has too much to do with it. But anyhow, a legend among the early Golden settlers recounted that something dreadful had happened to the Arapaho, and the valley which holds Golden became taboo to them. So according to them, there weren't that many Indians kind of coming through this area. I kind of doubt that, just because I grew up in the neighborhood under the M, and there's like the sandstone outcropping that you might recognize when you're driving on 6th Avenue towards Central City, that bend. And there was an archaeological dig there, and I don't know what tribe, but I mean, there were people hunting there were campfires, there might have been a body, there was pottery shards. So I mean, I think they still kept coming, but you never know. So Golden kind of, as we know Golden, basically got started in the gold rush. So what I do want to tell you about, trying to think of the best way to do it. Everybody came because of gold, okay? That was really the first idea. We did have one farmer here who did did remarkably well with irrigation, like once again into the northeast side of the field. He was one of the first Colorado farmers to do irrigation. He was also a confidant of one of the gold miners who actually found a huge deposit. So now I'm wondering why I have this weird page marked. Hold on. So, John Gregory. Probably everybody's heard that name with the Gregory diggings. He was bound for California, but he ended up hearing about the gold in Colorado. He was up in Fort Laramie and changed his course and came down here. Came down into Denver and went west into the mountains. In 1859, he encountered a gold vein in what would later become Central City. So this is a remarkable story. So he finds this vein of gold and it snows. And it snows really a lot. So he's starting to run out of food. He comes back down to Golden to get supplies, because we were the supply center for that area at the time. So he was frantic, having to leave this gold behind, wasn't happy about it, goes into a saloon, right, which everybody does. You come into Golden, you go to a saloon, I guess. We'll go through that. Anyhow, so as the story goes, he was sitting down talking to people, saying he had found this great load, but you know, he needed supplies. He didn't really have that much money. Did anybody want to grub stake him? So, according to the story, the farmer who did the irrigation, he did grub stake him some of this money, and he became a somewhat wealthy man. So here's the best part of the whole story, right? So he grub stakes this guy who's just really camping in the rough up in 1859, thinks he found a gold vein. He goes back up there, unbelievably, he finds it again. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever gotten lost in the mountains up here like I have. I mean, the odds of finding something, leaving it, coming down, returning, and finding it again are astronomically against you. So it's quite a good story in my mind. So,
Grub staking is what, just investing in?
Yeah, so like, if you, probably it's literally as simple as if you buy me 2 bags of flour and some bacon, I'll give you 5% of my mine. So like, that's how Horace Tabor became wealthy, is he actually grub staked miners up in Leadville or Oro City at that time, and he just extended them credit, maybe bought them some shovels, and he became fabulously wealthy. So the origins of Golden. Golden was really a conglomerate of settlements. Arapahoe, Mount Vernon was its own settlement with its own toll road. Golden Gate was a city, and Golden City proper, which is what we call Golden now. So the first resident was David K. Wall, a farmer who irrigated, and he grew vegetables successfully, which was actually a big deal because so many people, all they had really was meat to eat. They'd bring flour with them, so their diet was pretty bland, so it was really great to have vegetables and fruit. He made $2,000 in his first year. $1 in back then, in today's money now is about like $30. So I mean, it's not a huge amount, but it's really not bad. He translates into about $50,000. He grub staked John Gregory of Central City fame. The next person of note, and I should explain, I don't really go by the standard founding fathers, so I don't really talk about Seth Lake and all these people too much because everybody knows about them. So I'm kind of looking at like the stranger people in Golden. That's just how I go through Colorado history. It's like the little stranger ones. John Farrell built a toll bridge in 1859 over Clear Creek. Clear Creek used to be called Vasquez Creek, and then it changed along the way. And his toll bridge was over what is now like that Washington Street that goes over the Clear Creek Canyon. So, George West, I do talk about, he's one of our famous founding fathers. He was a newspaper man, a freighter, and an army officer. He arrived in Golden in 1859. He started out with 15 men from Boston, so he originally came from Massachusetts. Some turned back, and only 6 out of the 15 arrived, so 9 turned back. Their original intent was to prospect for gold, not golden, but upon seeing the valley, they decided instead to go into business in retailing, both solid and liquid. This was probably a really good plan on their part because there was no guarantees that you would strike it rich, right? The first known major buildings were the Boston Company and Loveland's territorial capital, and apparently they started on a wager. George West fought for the Union in the Civil War, and upon returning in 1865, he was a city editor for the Rocky Mountain News. And in 1866, West founded the Colorado Transcript. So hold this thought, because this really comes into play later. But the wager was Loveland was a very successful man. He was a representative in the early territorial government. So he had his building on one side of the street, and it's still there. And the Boston Company was on the other side of the street. So their wager was who could build the building fastest. So Golden didn't have a huge population, but then, to be fair, neither did Denver, okay? So there was 1859, there were 700 people. 1870, there was about, I don't know, looks like about 600 people. They had a decline in population, as all of Colorado did, and those were due to the people called the go-backers. They were the Pikes Peakers coming out here for like the big boom, but then when it didn't materialize, a lot of people did go back. A lot of people had no intention of staying out here in the first place. They were just coming out to make their fortune, and then they wanted to go home. So a lot of people did that. 1880, we start edging up there, 2007-30. 1890, 2383, and 1900, 2152. One of the things that I researched when I was writing the bad old days of Colorado was what stories are we told all the time that we just kind of take for granted. And I recall always hearing there were so many more men than women. So it was really crazily, wildly skewed. So if you go through the first census, which came out in 1860, there was about 38-to-1 was the men to female ratio. And those ratios included babies. They included, that's why we had a large red light district, shall I say, like the ladies of the night noticed the niche and they came on out in droves. But it took a while for ours. Like when the trains came in, we started seeing more women, more, I don't know, mainstream women, I guess is the way to phrase that. Golden was the territorial capital from 1862 to 1867. They primarily met at the Loveland Block on 12th and Washington. Ice and whiskey was procured for the legislatures, and that was no small feat in the early days. So they used to bring, if you were doing non-diluted whiskey, so there's a whole catch there too. It used to come in barrels. And they brought in an obscene amount, I would say, of whiskey that first couple of winters, like 1,700 barrels, because the shipments couldn't get through from November till about April because of the weather. So they would stock up. So it was something astounding, like about 32 gallons per man and woman of whiskey. But what you kind of learned was if you dilute that whiskey, it goes further, right? So unscrupulous bartenders or saloon keepers, they would put in all sorts of horrible stuff. They would put in tea to dilute it down. They'd lace it with strychnine, rattlesnake heads, sagebrush, gunpowder, prune juice. I mean, it was horrible stuff. And when you're reading about through the newspapers, it's like only 25 cents a drink. Well, that's $7-ish in today's money. So it's like you were still kind of paying top dollar for really horrible stuff. So it's always good to think about that. The ice came up from the mountains, obviously, and they managed to pack it down. In 1867, Denver was declared too dead to bury by the Union Pacific Railroad. So they ran their line through Cheyenne as opposed to Denver. Regardless of whether Denver was too dead to bury or not, they did manage to take the territorial capital out of Golden. Denver's population was approximately 3,500 in 1866, but Denver was still deemed more city-like. So once again, Denver's population shrank from the estimate of 4,749 in 1860 due to the go-backers as well. So here is a very strange and racy story. So Hattie Sandcombe came out of Kansas, and she was reading the Rocky Mountain News, where Williams Byers was the editor, right? Somehow she struck up a correspondence with them. And she told him she was going to move to Denver, you know. And I don't know if he thought anything about it, but he was always very much Denver's promoter. You know, Colorado's great, Denver's great, build up, let's go. So she takes him at his word, right? She stops by the Rocky Mountain News passing through Denver just to thank him for convincing her to move to Colorado. She comes to Golden, where she sets up a milliner shop, okay? And, you know, the first notice of hers in one of the early Golden newspapers, there were a couple of them, they extolled her Baptist church membership. And the pastor was very glad to have her among the flock. They couldn't help but mention that she was attractive and all this type of thing. Listed as Mrs. Sandcombe, she was unescorted, so she was on her own. So it didn't take long for the ladies of Golden to notice something wasn't quite right there. So apparently, the story goes, the word got out that she'd been taken in adultery in Kansas, which is where she arrived from. So apparently she was a divorcee, which is pretty wild, radical news at that time, and she was entertaining gentlemen friends in her home. And before long, she started somehow a torrid love affair with William Byers, who happened to be George West's former employer, and he's running the Colorado Transcript now, right? So everything was fine with this love affair until Elizabeth Byers, the wife, finds out, right? And this is where it starts getting strange, okay? So here you see, this is a clipping on one of the Golden newspapers about Hattie Sandcomb there. For some odd reason, Hattie decided that, and I see why, but Byers wrote her very mushy, passionate letters. These are not just the kind you write your sister or, the lady across the street, right? So Hattie decided along the line that she probably wanted to be the next Mrs. Byers. William Byers didn't really want to do that, but he seemed to be strangely passive in this whole frickin' mess, right? So she gets mad. She takes a pearl-handled pistol to the Byers' house where she shot at him. For some odd reason, Byers' wife saw what was happening and she rescues him. So I have no idea what in God's name he told her was going on when this woman is waving a little tiny pistol around. But she rescued him. She came running out of the house or whatever, and it all happened to be fine. A few months passed by, okay? Hattie tried again to talk to Mr. Byers, but Mrs. Byers saw her coming again. How, I don't know, but she did. She had a waiting carriage, which she leapt up to, whipped her horses into a frenzy. They go galloping by, and he being Mr. Byers, jumps into this galloping wagon, and they fly off. Hattie somehow gallops after them on her horse. Byers' son, who obviously saw her coming too, is waiting by a gate and was armed with another pistol. Hattie waved her pistol around but fled, later to be arrested by the police. So they all said that she was kind of insane and she lived in Golden. So this is one of our first forays into polite society, shall we say, is Mrs. Hattie Sandcomb. Following her through the newspaper, she did marry, I think about 1880 in Golden. So she stayed. She didn't go anywhere, but this was just quite the juicy thing. So why did everybody in Golden know about this? Because this was happening in Denver, right? By and large, other than her business here. George West somehow got a hold of all those letters exchanged by Byers and Hattie, and he printed them and he published them in the Golden Transcript. So that is what happened there. So, so when you're reading about George West, it's funny because people want to say Byers was a great guy, very temperate, didn't drink a lot, wasn't prone to having affairs other than the serious lap with Hattie, that we really don't know how he explained to his wife. George West was also supposed to be a very temperate, stable guy, but yet he gets these love letters and he just splashes them all over the newspaper. Why? Newspapers were entertainment in those days. So when we look at newspapers, it's kind of really yellow journalism. So I'm not surprised, but he wasn't very discreet, shall we say. So here's a clipping of some of the stuff he printed. I could read it to you guys, but it's boring just to have somebody stand there and read you newspaper articles. My grandmother used to do that, right? But Byers, hot sulfur kisses and warm kisses. Heloise and Abelard, William and Byers is Abelard. He promises, I don't know, he's promising stuff. His darling boy, his loving letters to her, they're just taking out stuff. This is Mrs. Byers, by the way, and that's William Byers, just pictures of it. So it just went on and on and on. It was quite remarkable. Here's a picture of Isabella Bird. There is a drawing and a photograph. Isabella Bird was a female, I guess she was from England originally. She suffered from a spinal condition. She was told that, as a young age, that she should really be outside and be as active as she could. So she came to the West, and she actually came into Golden, which is always very surprising to me. So one is a picture of a portrait, and there's a photograph. And she didn't have a lot of really good things to say about Golden, but in a way, who the hell cares? But whatever. Did you know that Isabella Bird traveled through Colorado in 1873, and Golden specifically? Before she even reached Golden City, she recorded this tale on November 13th. I left for my 16 miles ride to this place at 4 on Monday afternoon with the sun still hot. Passing by a bare, desolate cemetery, I asked a sad-looking woman who was leaning on the gate if she could direct me to Golden City. I repeated the question twice before I got an answer, and then, though easily to be accounted for, it was wide of the mark. In the most doleful town, she said, "Oh, go to the minister. I might tell you, maybe, but it's too great a responsibility. Go to the ministers, they can tell you." And she returned to her tears for someone whose spirit she was doubtless thinking of as in the Golden City of our hopes. Okay, so she runs into a crazy woman at the cemetery, or somebody out of her mind from grief. She also recorded the Golden City by daylight showed its meanness and belied its name. It is ungraded with here and there a wooden sidewalk supported by posts, up to which you ascend by planks. Brick, pine, and log houses are huddled together, and every other house is a saloon, and hardly a woman is to be seen. So then I'm like looking at this, and I'm like, I should start researching the saloons in Golden, right? Because what else am I gonna do? So here is the Cheney's Chicago Saloon. This is probably the most famous one they have. This was founded in 1861. So there you go. There was something in Golden Gate, like I said, that was like another settlement. McCleary's Restaurant, meals at all hours. The bar is furnished with the best wines and liquors. I like this one because it has free corrals for stock. So lynchings happened in Golden, and some of this comes out from the saloon behavior, okay? So if you kind of start getting the feeling that everything's a little bit entwined here, trust me, it is. And the entwinement and the entanglement really goes throughout the state. It is most remarkable doing research because somebody find over here impacts somebody over here because you know what, there just weren't that many people out here. So that's just what happened. But here is Edgar Van Ober. He got lynched in September 1859. Basically for assault. So this is not what we would kill somebody for, hopefully, today. You'd probably just get a caution and thrown in a jail cell until you sobered up. But anyhow, what happened? He had bad aim and a bad drinking problem. This was considered a precautionary lynching. The day started off with him playing cards. At one point, he owned a part share of a saloon in Golden. He ended up selling his share, didn't want it anymore for whatever reason, but he was in there playing cards, and he ended up shooting at his opponent. So he has bad aim, so the bullet gets lodged in the table, right? So still not cool, nobody likes that. He went around demanding money from customers in the bar. So like the people that own the bar really don't like that one. Then he went on to various saloons and likely elsewhere, and he kept saying he was going to kill somebody. So he shot up glasses at one establishment, name tactfully withheld. Reportedly, he took refuge in some poor family's cabin. The inhabitants remarkably let him in. I don't know why, but they let this crazy drunk person in. And in a few minutes or so, the story goes, hundreds of people were assembled outside of the cabin. He was hung on a cottonwood tree, and he is buried on the north side of the cemetery where criminals were buried, and this is in the old cemetery. So that's another thing I didn't know about, right? So then there's also Joseph Seminole and Samuel Woodruff. They were hung on December 28, 1879 for the Hayward murder. Both were pushed off from one of the railroad trestles. Besides committing murder, they were horse thieves. This was kind of like almost, you would think it was funny. You would think it would be like the story behind a silent movie. So Joseph Seminole was a half-breed Indian, probably Seminole Indian. Samuel Woodruff was just some no account. Samuel Woodruff decided he wanted to rob one of the doctors up in Georgetown, right? So for some odd reason, he rides into Georgetown, goes to get the doctor, and says somebody over in Kremling needs you, or somewhere in that district, right? So they have to go over Berthoud Pass and all this stuff to get over to Kremling. So the doctor goes over there, goes to the ranch. He hired the doctor a horse to go. This is really nice. And he's like, well, there'll be a change of horses for you over there. Don't worry about it. Go to this ranch, knocks on the door. The woman who is supposedly at death's door is washing dishes. She has no idea why the doctor from Georgetown is standing there going, I heard you were dying. She's like, no, I've never been sick. So he's like, do you have my change of horse so I can turn around? No, she didn't have any change of horse because she didn't call the doctor. So they got that sorted out. Somehow, I think he probably took the stagecoach back to Georgetown, gets home to Georgetown, and his entire house has been basically burgled because of Samuel Woodruff. So he sent this guy in a goose chase, robbed at leisure, comes down to Golden. He and Joseph Seminole get trapped outside of Golden, and they were hung. Joseph Seminoles was kind of sad because he was like trying to speak to the future generations. I've been a bad person, don't do the bad stuff that I've done, that type of thing, like a cautionary tale. So it's always kind of sad, but it didn't really, the lynchers thought probably that was nice, but they didn't really care. So they hung from a trestle bridge. So we had lots of trestle bridges at one point because we were the depot for the Clear Creek Railroad, right, that Loveland started, so just so you know. And then this one is a very strange story. Alexander McCurdy was lynched in 1894. This is very late for lynching. Supposedly we had the rule of law, but he emasculated his stepbrother Arthur Berry. So, this is so sad. So his mother and her new husband were sleeping in the bedroom. They hear this youth crying out, and he's bleeding. What happened? Well, Alexander thought he was hitting on his wife, who he was estranged with, so decided to take care of that one way or another. So this is what happened. Alexander had the same emasculation done to him before he was thrown off of a railroad trestle where he was hung. So, I thought vigilantism had largely died out in the West before this point, with the exception of Browns Park, Colorado, which is in the book. Those people were off the charts, but like Golden. So here I am going, Golden, nothing ever happens in Golden. Right, okay. Just, maybe my parents kept it from me, I don't know. The old Golden Cemetery was known at the time as Cemetery Hill, so I didn't know this. I don't know if you knew that there was an older cemetery? He's laughing. Oh, good, I want to do one of the ghost tours. It's an extinct cemetery originally located on a knoll between Washington and Ford Street, between 2nd and 3rd. They did change the numbers, so I think it's not probably that far away. It was an active cemetery from 1859 until 1873. The apex of the knoll was primarily used for burials, while north-facing bases were used for the burial of unknown persons and criminals. The new Golden Cemetery opened in late 1873. Newspaper announcements by George Kimball stated that the movement of the bodies from the old cemetery to the new cemetery was commencing. Well, if you don't really have relatives here and you happen to be buried, nobody's going to move you, right? Unless these people do. So anyhow, in 1875, a concerned citizen said, voiced the fact that many people buried in the old cemetery were from the ranches and the canyons west of Golden and had no family to initiate the interment process. And George Kimball in 1888 published a notice saying there are many lots occupied in the new cemetery for which no money has been received or the deed issued, all of which lots are liable to be occupied by charity or unknown persons. Okay, so that's probably like somewhat of a hollow threat. But what they did say in one of these old newspapers was the boys. It's always the boys, but I was probably one of those girls that would do that too, going through the old cemetery. I mean, you could see corners of coffins and stuff sticking out, so it wasn't done really well. And this happened all the time. In Denver, they moved the Denver City Cemetery, split it in between Riverside and Fairmount. That was like a gruesome process. We weren't as bad here, so. But, yeah. So that was a news to me. Now this is Thomas Tripp. So when I was growing up, the Tripps still had their ranch down south at Golden. I just thought it was cool because you had the woolly chaps and stuff like that. So I was all happy about that. And not much is going on, but you got wires, and telephones, came in about 1890. So I want to talk about horse and cattle thieves, and this was known as the larceny of livestock. Okay, Mount Vernon Canyon, one of the settlements, had its own stage stop, and it was purchased. Do you know about this story?
I don't believe I do.
Oh, good. Okay, it was purchased in 1868 by an English woman named Louisa Gifford. We had a lot of English people coming into Colorado in the early days. And it was reported she had lovely jewels, she had beautiful carriage. Reportedly, she was the daughter of an earl, but yet, anyhow, she ended up settling in Golden. The ranch where the stage stop was located was called the New York Ranch, and she had that thing insured, big time. So whether by design or otherwise, missing livestock in the district kept turning up on the New York Ranch with altered brands. And it also, the rougher element was kind of hanging out there as well. So people were kind of surprised that a daughter of an earl would kind of be altering brands, which is known as venting. So it's really a bad thing to do. You don't do that. They really take this stuff seriously. So better than that, so she's like doing basically, she's a wrestler. She's a fancy wrestler with good jewelry, okay? She hires a young girl to work for her named Josie. So Josie was figured really to be like a second Calamity Jane. She swore like a trooper. She was a good shot. Supposedly she would take an unbroken horse, put him to a plow, managed to like whip the horse and plow with one hand, whip with the other. I mean, physically, I don't know how in God's name he would do this, but this is Josie, okay? So Josie would drink. Josie was just Josie. So there were two associates, Charlie Reinhold and Bill Eugene Tunis. They were associates of Mrs. Gifford. And in 1886, this trio, they were each arrested on 7 counts. Each pleaded not guilty to the 7 counts listed. Gifford and Reinhold, the woman and Reinhold, they were found guilty. Tunis is not mentioned, so it's figured he might have escaped or he might have had a really good reason, but he just kind of falls out of view. Gifford was sentenced to 1 year in Canyon City. Reinhold was sentenced to 5 years hard labor in Canyon City at the penitentiary. But before long, the two were on bond. And the ranch mysteriously burned down. So they have big insurance payments coming, right? So the insurance company, I think it was in Chicago, figured something wasn't quite right. So they send out an insurance, I guess, adjuster, investigator at that time, and he was a really handsome guy. So Josie meets the insurance investigator, decides she falls in love with him, and admits to everything. So he sends back to wherever going, yeah, we were framed. This whole thing was like set up and stuff. But Josie, she took off. Her heart was no doubt broken. The guy from Chicago probably didn't care, but they didn't get paid their insurance money. So, but poor Josie, it sounds like a Calamity Jane type issue anyhow. So here's William H. Loveland. I did read a book about Golden, and they said not much was known about this man, and I thought, how odd. So I just put it here just because I can. He was an early resident of Golden. He was a Methodist minister's son from Illinois. He was one of the founders of the Colorado Central Railroad, which was originally the Colorado Clear Creek and Pacific Railroad, which connected Golden with the mines. For much of the 1870s, he waged a fierce fight with the Union Pacific Railroad investors for the control of the Colorado Central Railroad. He was highly respected but a failed politician. He ran on the Democratic ticket. Oh!
I just wanted to point that.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to point out that it was right there.
I'm like, yes? There he is.
Watching you.
Yeah, he is. He's like, watch what you say. In 1970, he helped persuade the legislature to provide funds for the Colorado School of Mines, which was started out by the Episcopal Church. He was the mayor of Golden from 1874 to 75, and in 1878, he was the second owner of the Rocky Mountain News. So, you know, when somebody says we can't, you know, not much is known about him, it goes on and on. One account said he died penniless. I don't know if that's true in Lakewood. I don't know how you kind of do all this and that would happen, but I guess anything's possible. And now I want to talk about Alfred Packer. Golden's connection. So, does everybody know who Alfred Packer is? No. Okay, we have a lady who doesn't. So Alfred, a couple ladies. Okay, this is Alfred Packer. Alfred Packer was basically a ne'er-do-well. He lied, he had a very high squeaky voice, didn't make friends easily. Joined the Union Army, and he actually did well in the Union Army, but he got dismissed or mustered out because he had epilepsy. So apparently maybe the seizures made him a little bit erratic, okay? By all accounts, he had a horrible sense of direction, and I do mean horrible. So he decides to lead gold seekers coming from Salt Lake City down to the southwest corner of Colorado, which is where we get the most snowfall, right? He decides to take them, I believe, in November. So we all know November is not a good month to be doing this stuff. So, you know, they're wandering into Colorado. Somehow they miraculously hit Chief Uray's camp. He lets them all stay there. They suggest to Alfred that perhaps they just wait till spring comes. No, Alfred decides with these other people, like the subset of the group. Some people were smart and stayed with the Uray's band. Others did not. So in February, they resume going down towards Lake City, Colorado. Very heavy mountain territory. Okay? There's a monument to this day of where their bodies were found. But anyhow, so there's an Indian reservation at the time down there. And, you know, Alfred comes staggering in, you know, starving, all that. His travel partners have died. He talks to the commander of the post. Oh, and by the way, he has this really fancy gun. Would the guy like to buy it for $250? Believe it or not, the guy buys it, okay? So now Alfred's got booze money, right? So nobody really knows what's going on. Some artist comes out in the spring, as the saying goes, and he's walking around to try to draw sketches, and he finds these corpses. I have a picture. You gotta see the picture. I thought everybody knew Alfred, so I'm sorry I'm veering off a little bit here. Let me see if I can find it. Alfred. Let's see, that's the Meeker Massacre. This is what it looked like.
What page is that?
That is page 91. You can see the cannibals, what happened to them. Okay, so then some of the people who sensibly stayed with Chief Uray's band come straggling into the Indian Agency later, and they recognize this very fancy gun. And they're like, one of the victims had that gun. Where did you get it? And they're like, from Alfred Packer, who by this point was a fixture in the Lake City saloons. Okay? Comedy of errors. I don't even pretend to know how this all went. But they arrested him, threw him in the Lake City jail, realized they have to feed him. They didn't really want to stick to the expense of feeding Alfred Packer, so they kind of let him go. So then they got better evidence going. He was getting worried and about to leave town. The Indian agent or the officer sent somebody in to arrest him, and they caught him just before he escaped. He had 2 trials, found guilty, got sent to the pen. Polly Pry, who is a journalist, was one of his main supporters. She petitions for his release. You know, he did eat these people, but I mean, maybe we would have all eaten people. And this was not our first episode of cannibalism in the state of Colorado, but anyhow, different story, but Alfred ate them. So he's going to the pen. Polly Pry wages a media campaign. He gets released. okay? He has to work. Does everybody know the Rooney Ranch in Golden? Okay, so down south, the Rooneys were a prosperous family. They had some of the toll roads, they had some of the clay and coal mines, just stuff. He got hired on by them to pick potatoes, so they were obviously growing potatoes. One of the other workers there somehow recognized his high, scratchy, whiny voice, went to the Rooneys and said, hey, you guys hired Alfred Packer to pick potatoes. So they gave him his wages and sent him on his way. So his grave is in Littleton, so just if you want to know that. So that is Alfred Packer. Accidents and tragedies. So back to the Giffords and the larceny of livestock. The New York ranch continued on even after it burnt down. They rebuilt. One of the next owners was a Judge Horn, and he had 2 daughters who drowned at the same time when their buggy overturned in a flood in Mount Vernon. Then we had the White Ash Mine tragedy, and I think the museum has a display about it, or it used to, I don't know.
In our Epic Events gallery, we do have an image of some miners from the White Ash Mine, but that one I believe is actually one of the offshoots of the White Ash Mine that they were digging at, so.
So that happened in 1889. It took place at the west end of 12th Street near Brooks Field, the School of Mines football field. Let's see, this is kind of scary, and you do hear about this in the West to this day. The state coal mine inspector, John McNeil, found that a fire in the White Ash Mine had been insidiously smoldering for a decade. So gradually the fire had worked its way from the dump on top through whatever it needed to. There was a barrier supposedly of like 90 feet that would make it safe, but somehow something happened and water burst through the retaining wall, shall we say, and these people were cooked alive because it was steam and boiling water heated by the underground fire. So there's a single shaft of rock that marks the site of the tragedy. I frankly do not think I've seen it. It has the name of the entombed miners. They couldn't get them out, so they just left them there. Joseph Allen, William Bowden, William Collins, Henry Huseman, David Lloyd, Joseph Hutter, John Morgan, John Murphy, and Rich Rowe. So the best books of Golden history, both are out of print, but if you ever do alibris.com, The Shining Mountains by Georgina Brown is, in my mind, by far the best. It goes into all the ranch history. Mount Vernon, it has stories of robbers, basically I'm gonna say like in the Kittredge, Conifer, Shawnee area coming back this way, so it's kind of branches out from Golden, but it's, why don't we say Jefferson County and a bit of Park County, so it's pretty good. Golden in the 19th century, a Colorado Chronicle, this was done I think as a fundraiser or charity for Golden. It's a good book if you can find it. And I just wanted to show you a picture. This was like a Ramblers group, and that's all their bicycles, and that's in Golden. I just find that fabulous. And I put that on Twitter, and some guy from the Mountain Museum's like, can we use this? And it's like, I think you have to ask the Denver Public Library, but if you get your permissions, I'm sure you can. So that is just my talk. It was fun looking at the stranger aspects of Golden. So there's all the nice normal stuff, and everybody else will tell you the nice normal stuff, but I just never will. So, so there you go, and that's the talk for tonight. Yeah.
And I was going to mention Cemetery Hill, our little display in Legendary People that we have, the kind of like little just miniature display, does show Cemetery Hill in it.
Cool.
So if you want an idea of where it was, you can see it in our little miniature display.
That always makes me so excited. I'm just such a cemetery.
Is that really true that when they were building the houses up there, they were digging up
Oh, I'm sure.
coffins and, oh, really? And these people still live there? I mean, I've walked up there
Yeah.
and stuff, but, wow.
He lives there, see.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
So I'll tell you,
Didn't
I'll
put that on the Zillow
Yard all the
report.
time? Okay.
I'll tell you another like off-kilter Golden story. So for a while, you know where Foothills Art Center is, and there's that house next to it that has the turret. So they used to be part of Foothills, and they had the art gallery down at the bottom, and they had an apartment upstairs, and so I lived upstairs, right? And it was like the creepiest place at night. Like it took me 2 weeks before I could sleep without the lights on. Because doors would actually open and close and all this type of thing, right? And so this you can tell them when you're haunted one. So one morning, I'm going to work in Denver, right? I'm brushing my teeth, and I hear footsteps, like coming into the house. So I freaked out. Golden was smaller, I'm older than I look, you know, so I call the police, you know, only like they couldn't figure out where I was. So then they call my dad. My dad calls down, he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, well, you know, I called the police, he's like, yes, I know, they want you to go let them in. And I'm like, okay. So I go down the stairs, and like, they were doing searchlights and all this type of thing, and I'm like, this is really serious. But like, I got down there, you know, there was nobody in there. They covered that place from the bottom of the house to the top. What the problem was, there'd been snow, and there was a man's shoes, boot prints, going into the house, and there was nobody in there. And this was all at 6:30 in the morning. You know, it's like I'm going to work, no alcohol, no wild stuff. And the police are like, oh my God, I was so late to work that day. And they're like, why are you late? And it was like one of those things, like, oh, I had a headache. so yeah, the Golden Police Department used to know me. So Golden can be kind of a spooky place. I think that house used to be the territorial attorney's house or something like that, so who knows who it was, but scared me well enough. And when my lease came due after 6 months, I did not renew, and they did not rent that place out anymore.
Is that the one that's the architect's place now?
I don't know what happened now, but it used to be an art gallery, and for a long time they weren't renting it out. I think, you know, it was just weird. It was a very weird place. And I corrected papers for this lady, and she came one Saturday morning. She's like, I used to live in this house, and I was young and kind of shy, hard to believe, but I wanted to ask her so bad, did you ever notice anything about this house? But I never did, and I never saw her again. I just took the papers, graded them, and turned them back in at the school. Never saw her, so I missed an opportunity there. So yeah, it's a Golden.
Why did you move from Golden to Denver?
Because I really seriously like grew up here, and there was nothing to do. I mean, now I know there's stuff, right? And so to me, like the big lights of Denver. So I bought a house on 22nd and Emerson. My grandmother lived down in Josephine and like 13th, so just the big city. Now I'm kind of regretting it, you know, with some of the stuff. Like last year when we were having all the protests and stuff, it was kind of rough. It was just like, Golden, this doesn't happen in Golden. But maybe it does. Look at the lynching. I don't know.
And the ranch, the stage top or something?
Mm-hmm.
Where was that exactly?
It'd be at the Mount Vernon Canyon, you know, so like, you know where that's the frontage road is that like goes up to Mother Cabrini's shrine?
Yeah.
It would have been right in that area. So that used to be a toll road. So that used to be a thing. What?
Up on Apex Park, if you hike through Apex Park, they still have the signs up that tell you what the toll is to take the trails.
Do they?
The first time I ever went up there when I didn't know the history, I'm like, do I have to put money in a box somewhere? And it's an homage to the original toll roads with
Right.
the wagon roads. So Apex Park where the wagon roads went up through Mount Vernon Canyon up through.
Yeah, and that used to be like Magic Mountain before my time, and then it was Heritage Square. And before all of that, it was like one of the Bachman ranches, because I used to go to school with Ron Bachman and stuff, so they sold that whole segment. And then, you know, and the Trips Ranch was back there too, and then there was a lot of ranches up by Golden Gate. So now there's houses, but yeah. So yeah, that's what I know. Hi.
I served as warden of the Canyon City Penitentiary for several years.
Did you?
So we had a lot of stories there about Alfred Packer. But the thing I want to tell you is I believe that in about 1985 I had I think the last person who was convicted and sent to prison for horse theft
Did you?
from Garfield County.
can I get your name and phone number?
Yes.
Serious, like your lunches, you can say no.
Sent to
We had a
prison for
2-year
what?
sentence in the penitentiary for stealing a horse.
Horse theft.
Okay.
We're talking about horse theft. So
Right.
the new book that I have that's coming out in June, it's like a contemporary Western, and I'm dealing a lot with like brand inspectors and horse theft, so that would be really good. That'd be very helpful, because I'm only done with book 1, I got 2 and 3 to go. Yeah.
So we used to live up on Lookout Mountain, and there was, one of the houses above us was, used to be a stage stop up there.
Yeah,
And then there was evidence of a road that was the stage road, and we'd heard this story about the stage, there was a toll, and people were robbed, if not once, a lot, I don't know, but along right in there somewhere.
I believe that. I mean, I've heard like that they definitely got robbed a lot down in Cripple Creek, so I think,
There's like, yeah.
I believe them. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just sort of like, I think always the newspapers were kind of a balance. So what I did find when I was researching Denver in the early days, like the first years when there were murders, there were lynchings, there were hangings, they did a compilation of crime, no murders. I'm like, what do you mean? I just, you know,
One of
so.
those streets is named Dead Man Gulch. I mean,
Yeah.
so somebody was.
I know,
think
people used to name things very literally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, Horse Thief Canyon, probably at some point there were horse thieves, or at least
Yeah.
people believed there were horse thieves back there. I mean, we were kind of a literal group, so, yeah,
Definitely.
so
We
yeah.
could have found some facts, but we heard just a lot of lore.
Well, you know, Colorado Historic Newspapers is a great resource. You can look under Golden, and you can just like type in stagecoach robberies in Golden and see if stuff pops up.
Oh,
And that would be the newspaper accounts of the time, so that's always kind of
and
interesting.
this is what her, okay?
Colorado Historic Newspapers. So yeah, it's fun. You
Yeah.
find all sorts of stuff. So I mean, if anybody ever goes through my browser and see what I'm searching for, I think like I'll probably get in a lot of trouble. I'll be like, Carter away. So yeah, well, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for coming. I appreciate everybody coming out.
Well, thank you. We appreciate you
All right.
coming and
Thank
doing
you.
that presentation for us. And I do want to mention, since you were talking about Isabel Bird, we actually do have a costume interpretation of Isabel Bird on May 18th. So if you're interested in that, we do have a presentation on May 18th about her.
Oh,
So,
really?
yes. Yes, I want to mention that. Yeah, so if you want to look at the photo of the White Ash Miners, you can go to our Epic Events Gallery. We'll turn the lights on for all the galleries. And then if you wanted to see the little diorama, miniature diorama of Cemetery Hill, you can go into our Legendary People Gallery just over here to the right. So they tie into all what you're talking about. And yes, I wanted to point out that
That was
right
good.
behind you. Well, thank you, Randy,
Well,
and
thank
thank
you. It
you
was fun.
everyone for joining us.
Thank
And
you.
I believe you'll still around if
Yep.
there's any other questions, and if you have any more museum-related questions, you can ask me or Britton. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So what do you think?